Hey everybody, it's Tammy, and I am bringing another law from the book Study, A Little Light on Spiritual Law. Today is chapter 30, and it's the law of perspective. This one's a big one. There's 7.8 billion people on the planet having a whole different perspective. Anyway, the consciousness of the person having the experience determines the experience. Time is not linear. Your mental state changes your perception. So if you are unhappy or bored, time slows down. If you're afraid, time stands still. If you're happy, excited, interested, time flies. Think about driving somewhere unknown. It takes longer than when you know the route. So the lower our frequency, the slower our perception of time. High vibrational activities passes quickly. Time has sped up on the planet by 1/3 because of the rise in consciousness. Time can be transcended. What are the possibilities? Seeing the probabilities. Think about dreams. We often move into different time reality. There's so many different levels of perspective. Size also depends on perspective or perception. Think of it as a child, right? I could remember Windsor was such a far way away. It was like a whole other land. So it even says houses seem bigger than they really do than when you're an adult. So it goes on to say that most people have experienced going back to a childhood haunt or a wound and finding it much smaller than they expected. So during inner child work, taking your now you back to the consciousness that experienced a trauma, looking at it with the ability to reframe it with the child in mind that experienced it. There's new content and new thoughts and new perspectives once you bring the now consciousness you into the perspective that the child in you saw at that time. Back then, it was defined by the child consciousness. It's like that's as big as your consciousness was back then. It could only perceive so much. Going into that and sharing more, then that child in you looks around in a new way and goes, oh, I didn't see that, I didn't see that, I didn't see that. So problems here seem enormous, and it can be simplified. So think of a problem that seems enormous before you go to bed, and when you wake up, it's like, oh, okay, I can manage this. It's like during your sleep, that consciousness or that perspective changed, and we process so much during our sleep. So we perceive matter as liquid, solid, or gas. atoms and molecules moving around at different levels of density. What we see depends on our perception. Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. So, reminding you that 7.8 billion people on the planet having a whole different experience per person, all is right, correct in their perception. So think of people that are considered insane. They're really just accessing a different reality with no judgment. You will always handle your challenges much differently along the way. As you expand your consciousness, you're gaining new tools, you're gaining new insight, new information. Oh, I didn't know that before. All of a sudden, that information, if you hadn't had that, the up and coming experience would have been perceived differently without that information. So amazing. So there's a couple of examples here in the book. So for example, you're driving a car and someone comes right up behind you, cuts you off, scrapes the side of your car. How do you respond? It's all about noticing your triggers. The triggers hold the consciousness or the wounds. If you're still in a wounded consciousness, you will respond differently than if you've worked on those traumas or those wounds. And we reach different levels of consciousness during our life. Like a 3-year-old only has a 3-year-old consciousness. 20-year-old's got a 20-year-old consciousness. 40-year-old's got a 40-year-old consciousness, and all the different things in between that. We're literally just here to grow. But some people in their 60s are still triggered and still moving from their woundedness. Driving a car. Like a third dimensional being, it's like there's a 3-year-old behind the wheel when this guy cuts you off and scrapes the car. So a third dimensional being might curse and criticize, get out and tell them off, punch them out. Fourth dimensional being has a more of a path of detachment. Well, that was my karma. I kind of probably attracted it at some point, understanding the law of karma. It's just a tiny scrape. There's no point in being upset. A fifth dimensional being on the spiritual path of unconditional love gets out of the car without a thought for the damage to his own car, has compassion for the person, wants to see that he's all right, and holds this person in the light. What about a client that does not turn up for appointments? How does one respond? There's a couple of examples. A third dimensional being will be furious, feel devalued by that, be angry at the client when they finally see that client, teach them a lesson. I'll just ignore them. It's very childlike. childish. A fourth dimensional being will detach, send a bill if it's appropriate, and let it go. A fifth dimensional being will phone to see if that client is all right and talk gently to that client. And then say, I've got free time. I'm going to go for a walk or do something different. It's like, oh, I get to go with the flow. So it's given another example. A kitten is injured. Someone with a closed heart wouldn't care, basically. Someone with an open heart, see that it would be hurt and go and help it. So this all depends on perspective. There's really no judgment. But a trigger will take you back in time to a younger you. And only awareness that everybody has a different reality, like it's okay. It's okay that that person shows me their wound by reacting. Just when you see someone having a reaction, there's a story behind it. There's a wound behind it. Maybe a need that was never met. If you judge something or someone, it's time to reframe your perspective. It's okay to notice it. It's okay to observe. It's okay to study that. But humanity as a whole judges many concepts from a third dimensional perspective. They condemn it as if it is morally wrong or it's considered weak. On the spiritual path of enlightenment, it's perceived as someone longing for more love or responding to a call for love. So there needs to be a desire to learn compassion, for an opportunity or a longing to express love, or to find more courage and strength. We're here to learn and to see that we're being shown our lessons, to accept, and bringing unresolved feelings to our attention, to be loved. Every person has a human aspect which merely masks the divine perfection. We will continue to struggle until we see the divine flame in all people and things. To be able to look from a perspective that is a greater perspective, from Christ consciousness. So I'm going to leave you with a final thought. All is perfect according to God's laws, the God of your understanding. Only our perception of it is distorted. Earth is known as the plane of illusion because nothing is as it appears. View all from a perspective of love, and you will walk the ascension pathway. Namaste.